Good afternoon and welcome to this International Cyber Threat Task Force webinar. And we're here today to mark the launch of a new book by Paul C. Dwyer, and it's called Cyber Risk Leadership. So we're just going to let people join in here at the moment. I see the participant numbers are increasing, and once we have critical mass, we'll start. So our format today is that we're just going to broadly introduce the book, and then we'll speak to Paul, and we have some questions here for him. But we want this to be an interactive session, so I'll be encouraging people to use the Q&A feature that they have at the bottom of their screen. So we'll just let the numbers come in there now, and then we will start. So thanks again for joining us, and we will jump in a couple of seconds. Okay, so numbers are coming in there now. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. So as I mentioned, we're here to mark the launch of a new book from Paul C. Dwyer, the global reputation cyber risk and cybersecurity professional. Author of several books at this stage. And the topic is cyber risk leadership. So it says, what every board needs to know, an executive briefing developed specifically for the business leaders of the financial sector and delivered by one of the world's foremost experts on cybersecurity, risk and privacy, which, although lofty, is actually fair. So Paul, welcome.
Hi, Paul. How are you? Good afternoon, everybody.
And by the way, my name is Paul Hearns. I'm a journalist, commentator and consultant in or around ICT and technology in Ireland for 20 years or so. So I know Paul of old and have jousted with him, shall we say, on many topics over the years. So Paul, just in terms of the book and cyber risk and leadership in particular, let's just go back into a little bit of context and see where in the kind of the broader perspective the area of cyber risk has come up onto the agenda and what it means then for leadership.
Okay, great questions to start with, Paul. And look, the book itself, and the reason we went with this title about leadership is because something that I've been, if you like, preaching about for quite some time is the fact that the answer to that cyber question is about leadership. It's a business issue. It's not something that we should try and push down into an IT department or an IT security department. And today, with the impact of things like COVID on cyber risk, that increase in digitalization, digital transformation, it's incumbent upon leadership to actually understand what those threats and potential risks are and understand how to work in that kind of landscape and to be able to take advantage of innovation and technology, protect their customers, their businesses, and so on, and not just be waiting and have a reactive kind of a stance to deal with cyber security and cyber risk, but be able to be proactive to be able to manage those things. So what this book is about essentially is about being able to empower and inform leadership, not to a technical level, to a business level, so that they can understand what the dynamics of all of this are and how to equip themselves with enough knowledge so that they can start to understand how to develop a strategy and how to protect their businesses and their clients.
And given that there's so many strands to that, both in terms of sort of business strategy, as well as the technological solutions that are involved, and then the risk profiles of different businesses, how do you go about crystallizing that into a structure like a book, and then maybe developing that further?
Yeah, so that was the biggest part of the challenge for me in putting this together almost as a syllabus, and it did actually start life as a syllabus because over the last decade I've been doing a lot of briefings to board level within corporations around the world around cyber risk and informing those business leaders on how to deal with this. And the vast majority of those, I would say, were from the financial sector itself. So we took a slant or a bias towards the financial sector in putting this together. And the challenge was, like, how do you keep it succinct? How do you keep it in a way that you won't lose the attention span, with all due respect, of that kind of an audience as well, that making everything rich and meaningful as regards content. And even when you look at the sort of the areas that I'm covering within that, we start off with things like the cyber risk landscape. So there we talk about, well, what's happening in the world, what kind of threat actors are out there, what we should be worried about, what we should be concerned about. And then I lead them in, and it's almost like the transcript of a briefing, of one of these briefings I'm giving, which ultimately would take maybe 3 hours of a briefing, where you're going through this level of detail with an organization so that they can understand those poignant pieces and understand what they can do about it. So it's not just about, scaring and saying, hey, where's all these problems, but what can you do about it? What should we do? What kind of questions should we ask? And that's the kind of approach I took. So I'll walk you through some of the sections here, Paul, which gives maybe a little better understanding, because I moved then straight into the underground economy of cybercrime. I talk about the ecosystem. How do these guys operate? Why is it $1 trillion economy? Then I go into the geopolitics. We talk about the fifth domain, nation state actors. What are we talking about? Cyber collateral damage. Why is it that financial service companies are hit with attacks straight after there might be posturing in the Ukraine around territory and so on, and understanding that link between geopolitics and the world of cyber, and how that affects risk to organizations. And then I focus in on the whole area of COVID, people working from home, that acceleration of the threats, the different kind of threats, and what it means even from the psychological impact on our workforces, and what we can do about that, and what's so important. And then, to make it real, I walk them through what we call a cyber kill chain. And that cyber kill chain is effectively the 10 links, or the 10 steps, which is the modus operandi of most cyber threat actors when they attack an organization. And what you're trying to do is break that kill chain, break it at one point, so that they can't continue on those pieces. So by bringing it to life and walking them through that, they get a real understanding of, that's why we do cyber awareness training. That's why we have those kind of controls in place. That's why we monitor. That's why we need to be proactive. And it starts bringing that to life for them. And then we sort of change gear a little bit, and we talk about developing a strategy. So how do you develop a cyber strategy that's aligned with your business strategy, and the importance of that? I then move into an area very close to my heart, which is CRQ, cyber risk quantification, meaningful metrics. So we don't want to bamboozle the board and the business leaders with white noise, with pen test results, with CVE metrics, all those kind of things. What we want to inform them with is metrics they'll understand, and they can make intelligence-led decisions. They can make risk-informed decisions. And that's what they'll do. I mean, the term entrepreneur itself, is a risk taker, and they're able to make risk-based decisions all the time. And we want leaders to make informed decisions around those things. And what kind of metrics do we need to provide? Inherent risk, residual risk, and aligning that back to the strategy again, and we go through that. And then we talk into a deeper level around the role of leaders around cyber governance and oversight. And then I start to conclude where I go through what we call the G7 cyber fundamentals. And for those who haven't heard of that, the G7 cyber fundamentals came from, yes, the G7, the group of 7 countries, after the Central Bank of Bangladesh was essentially compromised, and was often referred to in the media as the SWIFT hack, but really wasn't the SWIFT system that was hacked. But what that instant did bring to real life was that interconnectedness and that interdependence between all of the pieces that make up the financial sector, and how vulnerable the financial sector was from a contagion, kind of a knock-on effect. So these fundamentals were developed as almost board level advice, fundamental pieces of advice. So I explain all of those elements. And then I conclude with a focus on 10 things every organization can do around cyber resilience, which is the most important thing for organizations, are to be cyber resilient. It's not about stopping all the attacks. It's about understanding if you have been attacked and how to stay in business and how to recover. It's about cyber resilience, and that's why the European Central Bank has such a focus around this area as well. Sorry, I hugged it there for a little while, Paul, but I just really to get the content across.
That's quite all right, because it's good to get that kind of sectional overview to see that you're dealing with all aspects of it. But and there are a number of points there that we'll come back to in a little bit more detail. But I think one of the key things to talk about is that appropriate language for speaking to the leadership, to make things not just understandable, but to make it kind of evidential for them to inform decision making. So you have a lot of experience in that. So maybe share a little bit about how you adjust your language for speaking to the business leaders and to give them the best possible chance of understanding what's happening.
Sure. So look, ultimately, you're dealing with a very, very busy audience when you talk to business leaders. And if you think of this internal mantra loop that's going through their mind, which is basically the phrase going, so what? So what? Right? So you can go in and try and get their attention with a traffic light reports or a big pen test and tell them how many level 5 vulnerabilities you are. And all that's going on in their mind is, so what? So you have to make it real. You have to relate it back to the business. You have to relate it back to what that potential impact is to the business. And remember, like the formula for risk is, impact by likelihood. So if you're talking about being able to talk and convey and articulate about what the potential impact is and what the likelihood is, now we're talking risk. And they understand risk. And if you're able to relate that back to a particular service, a particular offering, a particular business objective, in other words, your cyber strategy, your reporting, your CRQ quantification, the metrics you're using are relating back to the business strategy. It is always, flummoxed me the amount of times I've gone into large scale operations. You're talking to their head of security and you say, what's the business strategy? And they go, oh, I don't know. I've never seen the business strategy for this organization. Well, then how are you doing your job? You have to have everything aligned. I mean, I talk about this even within the book about the two wheels of a car being aligned. And, you're going to have one wheel, which is a business strategy, and the other is a cyber strategy. So the wheels can go forward and bring that vehicle forward. And the steering wheel is governance and oversight. And the steering column and the framework is your cybersecurity framework. And that analogy is what I use to explain. You're trying to get all the pieces of the corporation, the enterprise working together most efficiently. But if you don't have that connection, if you don't have that alignment, then the efficacy is at a very low point, because you could think you're doing the best job in the world around cybersecurity. But if you're not engaged and you're not connected in what the business leaders are trying to achieve, and if they're not engaged with you and understanding what all of that white noise means, what all of those pen tests really mean to their business, to their aspirations, to their ambitions. So communication is key to success around managing cyber risk.
Very good, very good. Well, to come back to one of the other points that you made there in terms of the geopolitical situations having direct cyber actions coming from them, and most often not good ones. So we saw just recently the situation in Ukraine with government websites being impacted. So just take us through a little bit around that in terms of how those kinds of situations can spill over into potential cyber risks for businesses, and what they can potentially do around them, or how to understand them better.
Yeah, it's a deep, complex area, but it's a very interesting one as well, and it's one that people can mature up on quite quickly, because what we're talking about is going from a reactive stance to a proactive stance when it comes to cyber risk management. So let me explain a little. So what I mean is that there is a real connection. There is what we refer to as cyber warfare. It's referred to as the fifth domain. That was a term coined by The Economist magazine. So you got warfare on land, sea, air, space, and now cyberspace. And there are lots of activity going on, and there's lots of posturing. Lots of shots across the bow, if you like to go on. And this happens in real time, instantly. When something happens in the real world, we see this impact in the cyber world. We see the attacks, we see the traffic, we see all of those kind of things happening. So that proactive piece means that you can almost anticipate this. So a bit like a weather system, when you know this happened over here, well, that's going to happen over there. And that's where organizations need to be able to get to that level ultimately, and depending on what they are. Now, it's not for every organization, but for those that may be in that potential collateral damage fire line of what's happening, they need to gain an understanding of that. And I've talked about this before, where we've talked about, when we've seen a CISO of major banks and that they're hiring specialists around geopolitics, that they get it. you know they understand that they have to do something about it. And it's an uneven playing field. It's not a fair fight if a nation state is trying to hit organizations, but there is lots of things we can do to protect an organization. And there's lots of things we could do as a community, taking that sort of socio-technical view of an all of society approach that all the employees, the organizations, everything else can do to defend organizations and indeed a nation state itself from those kind of attacks. So in summing up, it's real. Cyber warfare is real. It's happening all the time. A lot of people say, well, look, we're busy with the day-to-day dealing with cyber criminals. Should we really be concerned with that? Well, large organizations should. And they're operating as part of critical entities. We have the CEO, Critical Entities Resilience Directive coming downstream now from Europe as well. And all of that is going to be driven all around this area of geopolitics and cyber warfare and making our digital society less vulnerable.
Well, we mentioned the language element in terms of making things understandable, but I suppose one of the other things that's worth talking about is making this kind of information palatable for the senior leadership as well. So perhaps there can be a tendency to catastrophize this and maybe make it a little bit too scary in trying to get attention. So how best can this be characterized to have the right impression, as in the need to act, but not necessarily scare the bejesus out of people, and potentially have a negative response?
Yeah, and there's two parts of that scare the bejesus piece, because you've got the piece where you could fall down a hole of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and you're trying to get the board's attention or the business's attention, telling them, oh, Grim Reaper, all these bad things can happen and so on. But the reality is fires can happen. What do? We have fire safety. It's part of business as usual, managing the risk of fire within organizations. So that's what we need to get. Say these things can happen, but we can prevent them. This is risk management. This isn't about perfection. The other hole we could fall down is it's a very sexy topic, and people can fall into the area of just being entertained by it and think, oh yeah, but that wouldn't happen to us. Why would the Chinese hack into our organization? Why would we be an impact of that? Why would the Russians want to hack here? Why would organized criminals be after our data? But it's getting past that question and them understanding that you're part of an ecosystem, you're part of a sector. And parts of your business value chain may be very interesting to certain types of criminals, and understanding that this is something that you don't just shrug your shoulders. Inertia is the contagion here. Like doing nothing is what makes it easy for these guys. It's why it's become $1 trillion economy. And the reality is that basic cyber hygiene will prevent close to 90% of attacks. So us all just taking, if I start using the analogy of COVID and washing hands and wearing face masks when it comes to cyber, if we all do the right thing, these bad guys are not going to be ultimately successful. We're making it so much more difficult for them. And it's certainly all of that sort of mid-level and lower level cyber criminals will find it almost impossible to break into systems that are patched and, people have anti-malware on and good long passwords, all that good stuff. Then that basic cyber hygiene controls makes it very, very difficult for the malefactors to be able to be successful. But at the moment, a lot of us are just making it so easy for them, and that's why the proliferation of it, why it's so pedestrian for these. But getting to the scary piece, what's scarier than the whole health sector of a country, a democratic country, being brought to its knees and people not being able to get treatment because of a relatively mundane, foreseeable attack vector like ransomware? This is real. And whether we're a bank or whether you're the health sector, these bad guys are out there. They're attacking organizations. There's a contagion knock-on effect. And if COVID has taught us one thing, we're all interconnected and interdependent on this planet. The internet is flat. So what's happening in one part of the world and those threat actors can have an impact in Ireland, in the UK, in the United States, in Bermuda, wherever.
Okay. Well, I see there are 2 questions in the Q&A already, and I just invite everybody to avail of that opportunity there. If you have any questions at all, please do put them in, and we'll come to those questions in a moment, because we really want this session to be as interactive as possible and to allow you to have your questions answered and get the value from it. But just one more question, just in terms of dealing with this kind of issue at the board level. And what advice would you have for heads of IT right through to CIOs and CISOs who might have senior leadership who are willing to have this conversation, but for people who haven't necessarily had the opportunity to present it before. So where is the best place to start in terms of having this conversation of cyber risk at the senior board level? And what are the best ways to go about it?
Okay, so there's some key things to keep in mind when you're going into a board to explain this, is truth, transparency, being really honest about where things are. Don't feel you should have to give comfort. Okay, that's key. Tell the truth of the situation, warts and all, about the way things are. Don't think that what they just want to hear is yes. The board and the leaders want to hear the reality of what's going on. But what they don't want is subjective opinion. They want fact-based. That's where meaningful metrics are so important, and being able to relate it back to the business. So be prepared to be able to explain it in a way that the board are going to understand, and be honest, because at the end of the day, it's not the head of IT or IT security that is really responsible around this area. The CEO is responsible, and the board are accountable ultimately for cyber risk across the organization. Yes, functionally, operationally, there may be somebody who's head of IT security or whatever, but ultimately the buck stops with the CEO and the board. So leadership do want to know, and they want to know the truth. And one of the things that fear that creeps in, and people are afraid to tell the truth, they're afraid to say, oh, we invested in this and it didn't work out the way we thought it would. Well, yeah, I need to explain that the risk landscape is changing all the time. So maybe a decision that was made a year ago, based on the risk that was perceived a year ago, was a relevant one, but now it might not be relevant. And keep that in mind when we consider COVID. How much has our business models changed? How much more people are working from home, using video conferencing, remote access to systems? So all of those things have changed. So the inherent cyber risk level and profile of every organization has changed. Therefore, the framework, the control matrix that is going to be in place to protect that organization and to support it operating functionally should have changed as well. So don't feel that you're on the back foot going in and saying, hey, we're in trouble in this area, that area, when it's not business as usual when it comes to the cyber risk landscape. Things have changed dramatically, and business models have changed dramatically. And where there may have been, it may have been understandable in a year ago to explain maybe why there wasn't certain controls followed. Dare I say, even shadow IT was being carried out. But with digital transformation, all of those gaps around residual risk, it's now time to take stock of those short-term decisions that were made about giving people remote access, and how things were operating for those longer-term imperatives. Because when regulators come in, they're looking to make sure things are done properly. They're looking to make sure people can prove they are cyber resilient. Look at the recent fines in the industry. Prove your cyber resilience. Don't just fill out a spreadsheet and go, we have this place. They want to see level 4 evidence. They want to show evidence that you have been able to test your plans, that you're able to actually be cyber resilient when it comes to these things. So the key piece here, Paul, with dealing with the board is the truth. Let them then have to deal with those decisions in a broader context outside of even IT, because we know cyber affects people, processes, and technology, and business models, and so on. So informing them in an honest way is the most important thing.
Very good. And I suppose it's worth adding that the speed of these potential changes and impacts are important as well, because we're now only since yesterday having the prospect of most COVID restrictions being lifted. So again, the prospect of people moving around a lot back into offices or going back on the road where they hadn't necessarily been able to be previously is now suddenly on the table. And again, it's a speed issue to how quickly can people react. So again, as I said, those snap decisions that were made to enable things could potentially be made again, and will need to be looked at and reviewed. So
absolutely. And to continue your point there on that, Paul, is it's so important. Cyber resilience is about being able to come back. So there's almost this pseudo cyber resilience program going on with every organization, where there's going to be everyone's getting a note to say, oh, well, we expect you back in the office 2 or 3 days a week, or blah, blah. That's like a massive change to how businesses are operating, again, because they've just worked out how to work with everybody remotely, and now trying to bring people back. That in itself is bringing a lot of risk and change.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we'll start going through to the audience questions now.
Sure.
And again, to everybody, please do jump in. And also, there's a chat function at the bottom of your screen as well. So if you have something that you wanted to share, maybe a resource or a reference, please do use the chat. And for any direct questions, use the Q&A. But one point, the first question in the Q&A brings up an interesting point there, which is increasingly part of the conversation, where it says, do you cover cyber risks related to crypto and blockchain? And do you have any references to online exercises? So again, even outside the likes of Bitcoins or anything like that, NFTs and all of that, digital assets are increasingly becoming an area of interest for businesses. So crypto covers a lot more potentially in the commercial space than it used to, and a lot of organizations are looking at blockchain as an infrastructural layer for different kinds of services as well, particularly in relation to public services. So is that an area you cover, and is it something you can provide information on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the approach and stance we take is not to get into the specifics of a piece of technology and say, oh, you need to patch this or do this port, close this port number, those kind of things. That's not the kind of information that, for example, is in this book. What this book is taking an approach in educating is taking the approach to understand, well, what are your assets? And most times when you talk to organizations, they say, oh, we have an asset inventory, and they have a list of the laptops, the tablets, the devices. Then you go, and have you got all your software assets? Yes. Now have you got your data assets? Now have you got your digital assets? And that's when crypto comes up. That's when blockchain comes up. That's when SSL certs comes up, domain names come up, all these kind of things. And they realize, we actually don't have a complete inventory of what we have. And now when we look at this inventory, we realize that the value of these assets to us has changed drastically. I'm not talking about just cryptocurrency, but the infrastructure to the business. So something that might have been a pilot project a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe now a core piece of the business. And that's what we're emphasizing and explaining within this approach to managing cyber risk, is that you need to work out what are those parts of your business value chain in your organization. We go through that about how to break down a business value chain and understand where those assets are, where are the interdependencies within your own ecosystem or your own organization, and then how to protect those things. And some of those will be technical guidance, and we use the community for that. So, for example, with this book, everybody who purchases one of these books gets an associate membership for 1 year to the ICTTF community. And what that means is you're then in a peer group, and you're able to work with your peers all over the world and exchange ideas, exchange information, collaborate. So, at ICTTF, we say it takes a network to defeat a network. And the reason for that is because what we want to do is want to be the antithesis for how these bad guys operate. And they operate by sharing, collaborating, and educating each other. So we don't profess to be the know-alls of absolutely everything. So that's why it's so important to be part of that community, because the community gives everybody an opportunity to learn from everybody else, learn from their experiences. What are good products to use? What are good approaches? What are good standards, good frameworks to reference within a particular subject matter expertise, such as crypto, blockchain, and so on. So that's something that's very valuable within this approach with the book and so on. And it actually gives me a good little segue here, Paul, maybe to bring up the fact that there's actually a video version, if you like, of this book available, which is an online course that we provide for boards around the world. So getting back to your question about how to deal with the cyber leaders, if they can get their cyber leaders to use maybe the training video, to do the optional exam, where they get their education records and they get their CPD points and all that good stuff, that they're validating that they actually understand all of this. That's a great step forward to do that. So it's not just in the format of the book, but this is about our aspiration for this is that the book is a way of bringing people further into the community and helping them work together, because that's a key to success. You know, not everything isn't in that book. I mean, that book has a lot of information. It's very rich, but it's about people being able to continue on and leverage that community of over 30,000 people now around the world.
Very good, very good. Okay, well, the next question came in kind of early in the discussion, and you've touched on a lot of the points there, but I'll just recap it. It says, how do we make this relatable so that board members who are concerned with risk can measure and manage things effectively? So just very briefly, just recap those points around, as you said, the metrics and making it relatable.
Yeah, so look, you know, I'm a modest man, so I'll talk about the fact of the other organization I'm a CEO of is a Cyber Prism with Cyber Risk International, and the piece of technology we developed there, cyberprism.com, is essentially based on a phrase that I used to say to people is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it when it comes to cyber risk. And when somebody takes that approach of being able to measure and manage the cybersecurity program back to the business model, then they get instant connection, instant support with the business, because the business then understands the importance of it, how they can take effective stances and controls, and where they're going to get the return on investment. You know, what's going to work, what's not going to work. And it gets back to us underlying that point we discussed a little bit earlier about, you know, how to talk to the board. And if you're disconnected from the board, or you're just talking in subjective terms, they're never, ever. You're just going to be the nerd, the geek that's coming in and talking about, you know, IT security issues and all those kind of things. But you're going to be a lot of obviously people would take something like the CCRO, the Certified Cyber Risk Officer course that we offer, as a way to learn how to articulate and communicate from a board level down and up to a board level. So that's key for people to understand those communication skills, those techniques, those metrics, and being able to engage people at that level. So knowledge is power, but knowledge also gives you the confidence to be able to speak at that level to a board, and it gives confidence to the board members not to be intimidated by the geek speak, by the acronyms, by the IT lingo, and all of that good stuff, because they can challenge things and go, well, you know, I don't understand what, I actually understand some of this stuff, and I want to ask, and I want to get the real answers. And, you know, a lot of that, because essentially this cyber risk leadership book is, if you like, a summary version of something like the CICERO course, the Certified Cyber Risk Officer course. So it's a great way for somebody maybe to engage on that, say, yes, this is definitely something I benefit from, and then maybe I want to go to that next level and I want to become a Certified Cyber Risk Officer. And that definitely helps everybody who's been on that. And you can see that even from the testimonials up on ICTTF.org, where people from all the leading banks around the world and everything else like that have done these courses. And they've said, yeah, this has actually helped me in my role, you know, and it's making a real difference.
Very good. Okay. Well, listen, we've actually got quite a few questions coming in here, so we'll speed along. So this one, I think certainly we've discussed this one before in terms of how organizations react. But what is your advice to persuade boards and organizations that we are all better off if we avoid hiding we have been hit, which is in inverted commas? Collaboration is what will help us to ensure that the modus operandi will not work for the next organization. So we've seen several major examples of huge organizations and even some security providers being hit, but sharing their experience to avoid or to help others avoid the same pitfalls. So maybe tell us, how do you change a mindset maybe in an organization for admitting that they've had a problem?
Yeah, look, I often sum this down to me today, you tomorrow. Nobody's immune from attack. And it just takes one small mistake, clicking on a link or whatever it happens to be, and those guys, you know, we have to be lucky all the time to prevent them, if you like, and they only have to be lucky once to get through. So attacks, breaches are inevitable, and there should be no shame in them. I mean, I know we've talked about this on podcasts and so on, where we talked about that almost similar nature to how we often blame victims of sex crime about, well, why were you doing that time of night? Why were you dressed like that? Why did you take a drink off a train? Why would you blame a victim? You know, and the reality is that if victims put up their hand and share that information about, hey, something was happening down there, or this is what we saw, that helps, because people could be prepared. and this shame piece of naming and shaming has to go. There has to be that reality of, well, how do we learn how to deal with this better? And I know we talked about this. For example, one of the case studies in the CCRO course, that's again the Certified Cyber Risk Officer course, is we talk about an attack on the banking system, which was coordinated around the world, real life cyber heist case study. But there was dry runs done of this on banks, and those dry runs, the people who were victims, those banks that were victims, never told anybody. And if they had, they could have potentially prevented those attacks, which actually led to the deaths of a number of money mules who were actually shot and killed as part of that as well. So sharing information in the right kind of context and the right kind of forum is so important. And I'm a big advocate of an all of society approach, where everybody, wherever the realm is, whether it's protecting children from cyber threats, whether it's protecting businesses and so on, there's a different level of intelligence that can be shared. But we need to remember what intelligence is: actionable information, not just noise, not just white noise. It's what can I do with that? And I think when we see things, obviously, like the NIS directive, the Network Information Systems Directive, we have NIS 2 coming, and we have, I mentioned briefly there, where we have the Critical Entities Resilience Directive coming in, and all of these things have an obligation in them for the state to name organizations that have been impacted or been victims of attacks. And I think we have to be very careful with that, because that can be sort of double-edged sword as well, from the qualitative risk perspective to an organization and their brand. And that's why I think organizations like the ICTTF become more important and more useful to businesses, because instead of maybe particularly coming out and naming a particular brand, maybe it should be saying things like through a forum and saying, well, the financial sector has been hit today. And this is what has happened. And this is the lesson we can learn from, or the telecom sector, or the retail sector. And this is what we're seeing. And maybe protect the logos and protect the brands, because let's be honest, you're going to have two ends of the spectrum. You're going to have an organization that is doing cybersecurity so well that they know they've been breached and they're able to report it. And then you're going to have the other end of the spectrum where they're doing such a poor job, they don't even know they've been breached, so they never get named and shamed effectively. So, I mean, there's a balancing act to be done there, but I think that's just about a process and about a protocol on how that will be implemented. I'm sure that will be handled adequately at the right stages when it comes to that. But yeah, look, I'm a big advocate of people being able to put up their hand, even when it comes to users, and they do something wrong. They shouldn't be afraid to report and go, you know what, I clicked on a link. I'm not sure I should have done that. They should be coached, not punished. As a consequence.
And that's something that, like, there are other industries where there are direct parallels, and where that kind of blameless reporting culture has already worked. So the aerospace industry, in terms of airlines and incident investigation, has operated that policy for decades, and so it's not even like reinventing the wheel or having to do something from first principles. So that there are direct parallels there. But just moving along, we're getting a little tight on time, and we still have quite a number of questions coming in. But you mentioned just the cyber threat task force and the forum there for discussion. So this question is kind of moving on towards that into that sort of practical area. What kind of support can ICTTF offer to board level executives to apply what they'll learn in the book to their own organization?
Okay, so great question, because it gives me a chance to talk about what we're doing in ICTF for organizations around the world now. And with the impact of COVID, we had to change from doing our annual EU cyber summits and things like that, and park those for a little while and focus on developing the Cyber Risk Academy. And that's given us an opportunity to work in different ways with organizations around the world. So we're able to work from the top level down, where we're able to empower the cyber leaders with different education programs, those operational staff, around NIST cybersecurity training and so on. And now we're working in a collaborative way where we're engaging with organizations, understanding them almost in a consultative way of where their knowledge deficits are, where they can be helped out, and then being able to recommend programs to them. And we open the door to engage with organizations around the world on that, and we've been able to help banks and organizations right around the world in doing that, and that's been very successful because we're able to help them understand this is business type education. There's lots of technical cybersecurity training available around the world. It's a busy area, and there's lots for the IT security subject matter expertise around firewalls and all that good stuff, which is so necessary as well. But at the business end, at the top end of the pyramid, that's where organizations are struggling. And that's where ICTTF is at its strongest on a global basis, because we have the content, the courses, the credibility, and the partnerships with organizations like the International Compliance Association to accredit that education. And then, of course, with the ongoing community, it's not like a course ends and you're done. You're part of a community. You're able to develop your skills further. Our material is updated consistently, and so is the material within the community portal itself.
Very good. Okay, well, there's a question there in terms of how you divided down the chapters of the book and the structure you put on it, but you've kind of covered that to a certain extent already. So not being dismissive, but just the fact that we've quite a few questions to get through, and we're coming close on time. So there is a question here in relation to the nation states and what we mentioned there. So it said, outside of damage limitation plans, what realistic chance has an Irish SME got against world-class cyber attackers from the likes of Russia or China, etc.? So I suppose, again, that seems like the insurmountable sort of situation, but it can still be dealt with in a practical fashion.
Yeah, so let me explain just in broad brushstrokes for that person. Is like, we can be cynical about this. Go, sure, what's the point? There's nothing we could do. Now, here's the reality. The reality is that a nation state who is trying to compromise systems, the vast majority of the time are only using mundane kind of known attack vectors. They reserve those what we call ATPs, advanced persistent threats, APTs, advanced persistent threats, for the high-end valuable targets. So you're not going to use an APT on an SME in Ireland. They're not, right? An APT, an unknown vulnerability, zero-day vulnerability on the black market, is $250,000, right? And they're not going to use 5 or 6 zero-day vulnerabilities as part of an APT attack to attack an SME to do something. So unlikely. It's not going to happen. Now, they still may want to attack that SME because they're part of a supply chain into an organization, but they're going to use known vulnerabilities, known crimeware and tools that they can use to break into those. So how do we stop that? Good cyber hygiene. The most basic kind of controls and a good framework put in place is going to prevent most of that kind of activity. And the high-end, more sophisticated threat actors, those APT kind of tools and expensive, and those high-end hackers that nation states do use, yes, they will be going after critical infrastructure. They're going to be going after the big targets. So the person who's asked the question is right in bringing up the point, because it can be seen, well, what's the point if you're up against a country and attacking it? It makes it a formidable enemy, a formidable adversary that you're dealing against. But the reality is that even those adversaries and nation states, they're choosing where they're going to use their weapons and use their strength against, and they're not using the same kind of force, the same kind of techniques, and same kind of resources against every particular kind of target.
Very good, very good. Okay, well, we still have another couple of questions coming in here. So there's a question here that says, what's your ideal readership? Security and technology leaders, or would this be more suitable for non-security / technology leaders, such as board members? So I suppose that's a good question as opposed to ideal audience for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think what I would love to see, the people that I would love to see reading this organization, are the non-IT security, cybersecurity kind of people, because this is really aimed at a business audience, and it's to help empower them and give them the confidence and understanding of those issues. But at the same time, there's a lot in it for the cybersecurity experts who will go, oh, there's nothing too technical here. That's fine. Get over, guys. It's not a technical document. It's not a technical book, but you're going to learn from it is how to communicate upstream and upwards into the board, and understand the language and the vocabulary that they expect you to talk with them on. So there's something for both sides, but personally, I think that it'll be more effective with business leaders, anyone who's on a board or reporting into a board should this should be bedside reading. I mean, they should just devour this and go, right, great, I've got my game together. They can go on and do the optional exam afterwards if they want, but they're going to be empowered. They're going to get the knowledge and the pieces that they need to do that in a fast track fashion, let's be honest. Because as I said at the start of this call, well, the biggest challenge I had was not to make this into a book this thick. It was by bringing it down revision after revision after revision, saying, okay, it's rich in content, it's interesting, and it gets all of the key salient points across that they're going to need to understand, and understand if they want to bring even their education path further, but they will be able to get to the point that they will be able to be effective. They'll get a lot out of it.
Okay, well, there's actually a comment here which I'll just bring in at this point, because it very much reinforces that. The person here says, having completed the CCRO course as a complete novice in the area of cyber risk, I was able to develop a very practical cyber risk resilience plan, which spoke to the Crime Stoppers Board in Western Australia. So I think that's a very good testimonial there to the fact that this is accessible, digestible, and actionable kind of material. So that's
that's fantastic. I'd appreciate that comment as well, because that is what we want to achieve out of the CCRO course, and this is an offspring of the CCRO course, this book. It's using a lot of the content and relating to a lot of that content in there. And, we hit our target with that CCRO course, because that was about empowering business leaders so that they could understand that whole world of cyber risk and security.
Okay, well, we're just up against time now, so I think we'll just deal with one last question. So just 1 minute on a very practical topic. What risks do you see specifically with staff returning to working in the office on a full-time basis? So as we said, we're expecting any moment now a government announcement on lifting of restrictions. So very specifically, as you contextualized earlier, if people made special conditions available to people, what can they do now practically if people are going to go back en masse into workplaces?
Okay, so from a cyber perspective, we're talking about bringing back that maybe parts of that remote world back in house and so on, but there's going to be this combination of people with devices bringing them back in house, if you like, into offices and so on like that. The biggest threat piece I see that's going to hit organizations is we're going to get an absolute plethora of ransomware attacks because there's going to be pieces of malware flying around everywhere and so on. So it's so important to make sure that we've got those kind of controls put in place to prevent the malware, to prevent those devices coming in, and that's where those attack vectors come in. There's a second part of this, Paul, which is really important for me to emphasize, and I've talked about this from about, I think it was mid last year that I was sort of raising my hand about this, is when we look at OCGs, organized criminal groups, when we look at cyber criminals, there are the guys that want to just have a quick buck and steal something and sell it, steal something, sell it. But then you've got the more strategic long players who will play the long game. Like, for example, there's one group that we've been monitoring has 650 Bitcoins in their wallet, their ransomware group, and they don't touch any of the money. So money isn't their objective, but they play the long game. So while we had this distracted workforce working from home, while they weren't in the most ideal conditions from a cybersecurity point of view, there is a potential, let's be all very honest, that their systems are being compromised and being monitored. And we know this from the annual reports come from all the big cybersecurity vendors, that oftentimes the bad guys sit on a network for a year or more before they'll actually deliver the payload, or before they'll actually exfiltrate data, or they'll carry out whatever they want to do. So we're probably going to see a lot of those kind of actions being taken now, where the guys who've been hanging in the long grass for a long time, month after month, working out how systems operate, working how money's transferred, how data is, how the checks and balances are done. And it is now that they will make a decision to exploit any vulnerabilities that they've seen. So we have to be sort of on high alert for the next few months and make sure that we're batting down the hatches and make sure that we're closing off those residual risks that we have encountered and embraced, and the burden of those from having a remote workforce.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much for all of that. So it just all that's left is to say, where do we get the book? What's the availability? How can people get their hands on it?
Okay, well, the best way to get the book, guys, is actually to contact ICTTF, talk to the team there, and they can organise the book for you. As I say, there's an associate membership with it. We can explain all the different offerings. It's available on Amazon as well, and bookstores in the United States and so on as it goes through the distribution piece. But the best way is to get it directly off ICTTF, and we can work with you and we can engage with you and speak to the team there about what you're trying to achieve in your organization, to understand the training offerings, understanding the bundle. So for example, this morning we had one board of a bank, and they came on and they wanted the video, and they wanted access to that to train their board. They wanted 15 copies of the book, so the board would effectively have the slides and the transcript, everything else. And they also wanted to take the exam so that they would have education assurance that their board had been trained and have the records of that and the CPD points. So we can tailor things to help organizations. So engage with us, and that's the best way, but reach out. That's the best way to do it.
All right. Well, just as we're wrapping up, our producer today, Natalia, has just put some links to availability and other information into the chat. So just as we're wrapping up, feel free to jump in there and get that. So thank you very much. All that remains is to thank everybody. We had a great attendance today, and apologies to anybody whose question or comment we didn't get to. I see there's quite a lot of activity there in the chat, and we had some great questions there and comments from people's experiences. So hopefully this will have given you a good idea of the issue of cyber risk, leadership within the area, and how to interact with business leadership to properly present cyber risk. So Paul, thank you very much for the book. First of all, for your comments today and all the information around that. So please do check out icttf.org, and you'll see direct links there to the community, the whole value proposition of being within that network to help you with your cyber risk and cybersecurity issues, and the availability of the book and the attendant education program. So Paul C. Dwyer, thank you very much. My name is Paul Hearns, and we'll hopefully see you on another ICTTF webinar where we'll deal with the ongoing issues and emerging problems. So thank you very much to everybody. Thanks to our producer Natalia, and we'll see you all again.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.